Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pels.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. We're excited to be starting a small mini-series today on rational intimacy. And this is such an important topic, Tom. Actually, it's more than just a topic because it's a whole new paradigm, a whole new way of living, really. And in our first podcast episode, we talked about the tsunami of stress. It's that predictable, far too familiar, escalating pattern of fight and flight that we all experience to one degree or another. To get most out of this episode, we just like to encourage our listeners to maybe go back and re-listen to that first episode, or maybe if this is your first time. First two episodes, that's right. Yep. We had 2 episodes on the tsunami of stress. One was the human condition, which this paradigm that we find ourselves in, and the other one was all about those core issues that come up in it. And also, if you haven't listened, if you're joining us for the very first time, we'd encourage you to go and listen to those first 2 episodes too, because what we are going to talk about in this episode, which I'm so excited about, because it's really been transformational in my own life, is the beneficial alternative to that very detrimental pattern of the tsunami. So, Tom, before we kind of get into rational intimacy and this whole new paradigm, and we're going to be talking more about what that really looks like in actual life, how it impacts us relationally. I just think it would be good just to have a quick review of the tsunami of stress. And we know that those are 9 stages in the tsunami. Do you want to just kick us off, maybe a quick review there?
Yep. I remember from one of my educational classes in one of my masters that there was the paradigm of, if you really want to learn something, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you just told them. So we'll do a little bit of repetition here.
Okay.
So, in terms of that tsunami of stress, the first stage is where the flight or fight reaction is triggered by a sense of perceived or sensed threat. We sense a feeling of stress and need. We become aware of that stress and need, and we attempt to avoid or flee it.
Yeah.
And the core issue associated with the stress and need we're feeling is that it causes us to feel insecure and inadequate.
Yeah.
Then that escalates into the second stage, which is where the stress becomes distress and the need becomes a sense of discontent as we attempt to fight or control the threat. And the core issue with distress and discontent is feeling powerless to do anything about the situation or the relationship that triggered the tsunami to start with.
Yeah.
And then in that third stage, the distress and discontent transition into avoidance and isolation as we again attempt to flee or avoid that threat. And all that does is make worse the core issue of a lack of control. Something has it, and I don't. And then that fourth stage comes in with we're back to fighting the threat, and it escalates into resistance. I don't want to deal with this. Defiance. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not going to deal with you. And then we get angry, and then there's some form of a non-assertive response. We become passive-aggressive, or aggressive-passive. And the core issue at this stage is poor self-image and low self-esteem. Who likes themselves when they're angry? No.
Not many people.
No, and I don't think much of myself, and I certainly don't respect me. And so in stage 5, we just want to feel good. And avoid that threat, and we get focused on things that do make us feel good, on self-gratification.
So and those are those maladaptive ways of coping.
Maladaptive coping, right. And that, because it's not healthy, it is maladaptive, that we wind up harming, to some degree, ourselves and others in the relationship. And the core issue associated with that self-gratification and resulting harm to self and others is that we feel even more secure and more inadequate because now look what I've done.
Yeah.
And then in stage 6 in the tsunami, having done something that was unhealthy and detrimental to ourselves and often to others, we understandably feel some combination and to some degree shame and guilt and fear and self-condemnation, as we now are in a fight for control over ourselves and perhaps others. Mm-hmm. And that core issue with distress, with the shame and the guilt and the fear and the self-condemnation is feeling powerless, just as it was with the distress and discontent earlier.
Yeah.
We just feel powerless to do anything about it, especially even to manage ourselves. Which leads us right into the 7th stage, which is escaping self-awareness. Now the avoidance isn't others, it's ourselves. And I want to escape self-awareness. I want to escape me. I don't want to be in relationship with me because I don't like me and I don't know what to do with me. And that core issue in our attempts to avoid real responsibility and empathy for the impact of our choices and decisions is feeling even a greater sense of lack of control over the dysfunctional situation and relationship that has developed and escalated as a result of our own unhealthy choices and decisions. And that core issue is about a lack of control over personal well-being, or ability to change, or stop the maladaptive coping. Then we get into stage 8 in the tsunami, which is what I call pseudo-change. We feel bad about what we did, and if we feel bad enough for long enough, we don't actually have to change, we just have to feel bad, and I promise it's gonna stop now, I'm gonna reform, I'm gonna be different, things are gonna change, but the fundamental issues weren't resolved, and so the change doesn't happen no matter how committed we are, and then we wind up relapsing. We wind up continuing in the very things that we hate and don't want to have happen. And all that results in, with a core issue, is a further erosion of our self-image and even lower self-esteem. And finally, in that final stage in the tsunami, what I call pseudo-normal, and we're back to a kind of avoiding, and the tsunami has passed in terms of how detrimental and powerfully impactful and it feels. And we're just back to, okay, normal, and it's okay now, and that pretend normal occurs, but all that's done is set us up for the next triggering. Because things got far, far worse than they were before. Yeah. And the last time it was through the tsunami. And which leaves us feeling even more insecure and inadequate when it gets triggered the next time. And this succession of waves of tsunami occur.
And so this is just such a detrimental pattern that most people actually are experiencing at some point. Maybe many times. Maybe it happens in a day, or you've said to me some people are living in it for years. And describe to me as well about the, it can be, the escalation of that, the tsunami wave, but then there's waves within the waves.
Yes. It's, if you think about a tsunami isn't a wave. It's a succession of waves. And so with the tsunami of stress, it can be a succession of waves of this pattern, and each one is an escalation through that. But it can be for hours or days or weeks or even years that our life is characterized by some aspect of the tsunami of stress wave as we experience successive waves even in that.
Yeah.
So the person who, for instance, is just consumed with shame and guilt and fear and self-condemnation over something that they did or something that occurred, or the person who is in the avoidance and evasion and they are isolating themselves, they are not connected, they're relationally avoidant, Or the person who is just chronically stuck in that self-gratification and they obsess or they just are consumed with what will make me feel good now? What will make me feel good? Or the person, and you've probably run into them, and maybe we've each even lived in that pseudo-normal. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, how are you? Oh, I'm great. Yeah, life is great. Not!
Yeah, that is so prevalent, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
The superficial conversations that we have with people, and I mean, I can't count the times where I've said that when actually underneath it, in the surface,
we're telling ourselves, liar. No, I really believe that.
I'm fine, and that the tsunami is raging. Yeah.
Or the person who is, and you probably know people like this, who are just chronically distressed and discontented. They just can't seem to find their happy place.
Yeah.
And they're in the tsunami in that second stage of distress and discontent.
Yeah.
And it just characterizes their lives. Or the person who is in that first stage, and it's just they're constantly on edge, feeling that sense of stress and need, and the sky is falling, No. Yeah, it is.
And so, so we're like, thank you for giving us that overview, just because I think it does provide the context for what we're going to be talking about now, which is this whole new paradigm, a whole new way of living, which is healthy.
Yes.
Which you've coined.
Which is normal.
Which is what we are meant to be.
It's just that the tsunami is so typical.
Yes. And so what we'd love to talk about now is rational intimacy. How can we live in a space of rational intimacy where that becomes the normal? And actually the tsunami is the exception. So we're switching it up. Can you just describe a little bit, Tom, of, I mean, I know we're going to kind of go into what rational intimacy actually kind of looks like in our lives, but can you just describe a little bit about where does this come from? Like, how did you even grapple with this? I mean, obviously, as a therapist, you've been dealing with people in the tsunami of stress. That's why a lot of the time why therapy exists, because we're not managing, we're not coping. But where does that rational intimacy come from?
Over the course of a career in ministry for 14 years and as a psychotherapist for 15 years at the time, there was such an absence of what's a healthy alternative. Does it have to be only about what is wrong and what's unhealthy and constantly going over that and seeing what's wrong? Can it be about there's an alternative? We don't have to live in this dysfunctional state and constantly focusing on that. And so what I began with that shift observing is that there can be and is a normal, healthy, rational intimacy experience possible. And I began to document and identify and describe, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Because it was progressive. It was growing. It was a maturing. And as I saw clients change, as I saw that occurring in my own life, I could see, well, there's a predictable pattern that can be nurtured, that can lead to increasingly normal, healthy, rational, intimate relationships intrapersonally with ourselves and interpersonally with other people.
Yeah, I love that. And I think what's interesting is that the more and more you pursue rational intimacy, the more it does build. I was reminded just this morning about how the tsunami, we've likened it to, the core issues in the tsunami are like these these stories of the building that collapse on one another, or dominoes that have this, when one goes, they all kind of fall. And yet rational intimacy is something that it doesn't all fall or collapse on each other. It actually builds upon itself. And so the more and more you pursue it, the more momentum you give it, the more it becomes the normal part of life rather than the exception of life. And
then the less vulnerable, the less reactive we are, and the less likely we are to escalate in the tsunami.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it becomes I could, but no.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. I have this wonderful alternative to experiencing all of that.
And unfortunately, I think people just don't know that there is an alternative.
Yeah.
And they haven't been able to see it or believe that they can apply that to their life, which is why we're doing this mini series on rational intimacy. Yeah. We're going to take a number of podcast episodes on this because we really want to take a deep dive, because it really does impact people's lives, especially relationally, how we relate to others and ourselves. So I'm super excited to be looking at how rational intimacy can impact our lives.
So with homeostasis restored, which is what AHA allows for somatically, and the AHA problem solving allows for a cognitive homeostasis, and there can even be a spiritual homeostasis in that restoring an optimum function in our being. And so in body, mind, and spirit, and for some people, it's just if they can get the body into homeostasis, they're good and they can move forward with their lives. For others, the nature of the impact of the prior stress and trauma has disrupted relational intimacy. And the problem solving becomes a source of either a solution, or it's just perpetuating the same problems and coping in unhealthy ways.
So let me just interrupt that. So basically, are you saying that actually for some people, the levels of trauma that they've experienced in their lives, or the
degree and the nature of
the nature of them has impacted how they relate.
Yes.
And so for those people, this is so important, rational intimacy, because it's like a relearning of a way to relate to others that hasn't got those filters of distorted intimacy.
Yep.
So not everyone will have that level of trauma that's really significantly impacted the way they can relate to other people.
Yep.
But there are some people who would have that in their lives.
Yep.
And, they'll do AHA, somatic work, have a level of, homeostasis in the body, but actually relationally, there needs to be more to have happen.
Yeah, and that's where the problem solving, the cognitive homeostasis, can be so influential. Helping to think in more rational ways.
Which leads us into...
Because rationality and irrationality is a spectrum. It's not I'm being rational or I'm irrational. It's not black and white. It's more of a spectrum. It's how rational or how irrational.
Yeah.
And it's a spectrum. So with homeostasis restored, if that's body and mind and spirit, the reactivity to stress and trauma triggers being managed now and able to be managed, a very different sort of intimacy can be experienced with self and others. So the pattern of relationship with self and others, where homeostasis is the norm, is what I call rational intimacy. So rather than a repeated experience of successive waves of that tsunami of stress and the unhealthy, dysfunctional intimacy, there is a healthy and functional, intimate experience with self and others. So rational intimacy is a healthy alternative to the dysfunctional interactions in the tsunami. So where the tsunami of stress is an escalating pattern of flight or fight, rational intimacy is an observable and intentional experience of personal growth and maturity, and allows for deepening of intimacy with self and others.
Yeah.
So rational intimacy has 8 stages.
Yeah.
The initial stage of rational intimacy is characterized by what I call contentment. And there's this sense of contentment, which is generally thought of as a state of satisfaction and happiness. But that isn't necessarily necessary for there to be contentment. So from the perspective of rational intimacy, contentment is a sense of satisfaction and well-being.
Mm.
And we can be content. I can have a sense of satisfaction and well-being that doesn't necessarily mean I'm happy. Life isn't necessarily lived totally in that happy place.
Mm.
Life doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
Situations, relationships don't support and reinforce that. But it doesn't mean I can't have a sense of satisfaction and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, homeostasis.
Mm-hmm.
So that may or may not include a sense of happiness. And the core strength that begins to emerge with that sense of contentment is feeling secure and capable.
Mm-hmm.
I in a prior conversation, I had used the analogy of when I climb a 14er. I get up to that 300 or 400 feet from the top of the 14,000 foot peak, and the oxygen just isn't available. And I have to take breaks just to allow sufficient time for the oxygen to build up. I wouldn't describe my emotions at that place of oxygen deprivation as happy. But I feel secure, I feel capable, I keep pushing on, but I'm not happy about the lack of oxygen. I can't breathe.
That's so true. And I think that distinction's really important between satisfaction and contentment, that well-being, as opposed to happiness, because in some ways, happiness is can come at different times of our lives, but we can actually, in the first stage of rational intimacy, have that contentment and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that, I know that for me, Tom, we were just talking about this earlier, weren't we? How, we were reflecting of a year ago with me and just...
Because it was about a year ago that you did AHA.
Yeah, it was my first AHA somatic session. And we were just talking about how, in my own life, there's been this moving in towards rational intimacy. And I remember that first stage of contentment and well-being. It felt so foreign to me.
It's like, what is this?
Yeah. I think I'd been living in the Tsunami of Stress. And like I was joking with you, I knew all of the signposts. I was the mayor of the town of the Tsunami of Stress for many years. And I think one of the things that is so detrimental to the Tsunami of Stress is how it impacts the way you relate to yourself and others. These perceived threats, these, triggers of that saying that you say, was it, this is...
That was then, and that is now.
That was then, and then is now. I mean, how true is that? But I found that was happening relationally.
Oh, yeah.
Time and time again. Someone would do something or respond to me in a certain way, and instead of just seeing it for what it was, it would trickle all the way back to a trauma or a trigger. So that's the world that I got used to living in, and didn't know that there was an alternative, or maybe hoped that there was an alternative, but had no idea how to get into this other world of rational intimacy. So I just wanted to say that, because that first stage, I remember, what a relief, and it's not determined on happiness, but what a relief to feel that well-being, that contentment, that I can acknowledge the fact that I'm climbing a 14er, I'm out of breath, and
I can't breathe, but
I can't breathe, but
I can get there.
I can get there. Yeah, I'm secure and I'm capable.
Yeah. And then that pattern of rational intimacy progresses into a second stage. It grows into it. It's organic. It just naturally begins to develop.
So out of that first, so that needs to be in place first.
Out of that sense of contentment can grow a second stage that I call grace. And grace is this, in ancient Greek, is the word charis. And it had a dual meaning of gifting and poise. And what happens in the stage of grace, that is this maturing and progression from a sense of well-being and contentment is that your natural gifts begin to emerge. You become more yourself, and your gifting, your strengths, your capabilities, the things that you can contribute, the ways that you can be beneficial in your life and other people's lives and in situations begins to emerge, and there's that emotional poise. You can be present, and instead of being distressed and discontented or stressed, and you can have that sense of grace, of poise.
Yeah, I love that.
Because the core strength associated with that is that you feel empowered.
Yeah, that's so great, Tom. I love that sense of grace. And I think, again, just looking back, when you're so caught up in comparison or what other people think of you, there's no chance to get to that point of grace.
You don't even appreciate your gifts.
No, because there's always this, and actually, if you go down that rabbit hole, there's always people who are better than you, or will put a shadow on you, or whatever it is. But actually to enter into this place of the second stage of rational intimacy that grows organically into a place of grace, where you just I think the poise is beautiful. It's like, actually, I see it almost as a chance to breathe. I'm grounded enough to breathe and not be so distracted with everything else that's going on around me that I can actually appreciate the giftings that I bring to this world and appreciate them and love them, I mean, it's great.
And then what can develop out of that is in the third stage of rational intimacy, which naturally expresses that gifting and poise in connection and engagement. And that third stage of rational intimacy is about connecting, engaging, being involved, contributing.
Yeah.
And with that fundamental sense of contentment in relationship with self, others, and the situation, that allows for the expression of personal gifting and emotional poise in relationship, in community. So as rational intimacy matures into a deepening sense of this being present and engaged and involved, there's a sense of bonding and belonging that develops with this increased relational involvement. And the core strength resulting from that connectedness, that engagement, that involvement, is that you become more influential. And it's not about control. Who has it, who doesn't, I don't, how can I get it? It's not about control at all. It's about appreciating how influential we can be and ways that we can be influential in beneficial ways with ourselves and others and in situations.
And I think that I'm just thinking back to what you said about, for some people who've had a level of trauma in their life that has impacted the way they relate, the way they connect or bond with others. This is huge. This is a massive progression where, I think, if there's triggers or filters in ways where, there's mistrust or things that are happening, which basically make you go into that avoidance and isolation.
Yes.
To be able to move into this third stage of rational intimacy, where out of that place of grace, gifting and poise, you can actually connect and engage, and then off the back of that core strength, is to not only to know that in that level of community, that healthy community, now you have it influence. You don't have to fight for it. You don't have to play the game. No. You are just influential by being you in this space.
And more influential. And the more and more influential you are in beneficial ways in your own life and in the life of other people, the more engaged you are. The more connection, the more present and involved you can be.
Yeah.
So then that fourth stage of rational intimacy naturally promotes what I call devotion. And devotion is usually thought of as love, loyalty, enthusiasm for a person, an activity, or a cause. And devotion naturally occurs out of that sense of contentment, gifting and poise, engagement, involvement, and then the devotion is to the person, the activity, or the cause, and it's you.
Mm-hmm.
It's ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And not in a narcissistic self-love, oh, I am, but in a very healthy, love your neighbor as yourself kind of way. And it really does allow for a sense of devotion. You become your advocate. You're committed to your well-being.
Yeah. And I think it's so important because like you said, we, in some ways, I think our experience of devotion can swing so far into the unhealthy spectrums of the narcissist or the such low self-image that, I know that for me, I found it so easy to be devoted to everyone else apart from myself.
Yes.
And actually you can't love other people well out of that place. So there's this understanding of being devoted to yourself, and out of that, then you can be devoted to others in a healthy way.
Yeah, this podcast developed because of your sense of devotion. Love, loyalty, and enthusiasm for a person, activity, or cause. And that was not just you, but wanting others to know about this. How can others know more about this? Well, we can do a podcast. Okay. Not on my radar, but let's go.
I remember those conversations, Tom. Those early days of suggesting it and thinking about it and then putting a few thoughts together over email, and look at, we are here.
Yeah. In rational intimacy, the cause is self and others and mutual well-being. And rather than a win-lose relationship where I win and you lose, or a lose-win relationship where I lose and you win, it's all about win-win. I win, you win too. And the focus is on mutual benefit with devotion. The other person may or may not even be willing to participate in that. But their willingness or lack of willingness doesn't determine your course of action with devotion. That fundamental commitment, love, loyalty, and enthusiasm for a person, activity, or cause. You can press on and you keep pressing on. And you can remain committed to valuing relationship with self and others equally, and allow for the other person to join you or not. And continue to invite. And the core strength with devotion is a healthy self-image and a sober self-esteem. We're not thinking too highly or too poorly of ourselves. It's a sober sense of self-worth. I matter. Yeah. I have worth. I have significance. And a healthy self-image.
I think that's so important, especially, especially today where there's just, image is just like so hard to grasp. And I think for me, going through AHA and entering into this new way of living, really, rational intimacy, to be able to healthily say, you know what, Ruth, you're pretty good. Like, you're great. I can love myself here, not in an overblown way. No. But equally not in an underblown way. I am Ruth, I've got a contribution. I think that has been such a gift to me to be able to embrace that. And I think we skirt around it, don't we, in society, of like ignoring that.
Because
part.
Often we don't know how.
We don't know how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what naturally results from that devotion, that love, loyalty, and enthusiasm for the person, activity, and cause, which includes ourselves, is what I call envisioning. And that's that fifth stage of rational intimacy, envisioning. Rather than fantasizing about, wouldn't it be great if, and if only, there, with envisioning, there is an openness to new possibilities and ways of relating to self and others. And the core strength associated with envisioning is feeling even more secure and capable of healthy, rational, intimate relationship with self and others.
Yeah. That's amazing that we can be like that. And I think the switch again is, well, it certainly was for me, instead of thinking kind of, well, if this person would change, or if if I was them, I would do it this way. Yes. Or, you can project onto other people.
And if only things could be like this. Then...
Oh, yeah, exactly. And if only these circumstances, or if only this person would think like that. And that's all just that kind of tsunami space.
And it's just that need to feel good.
But this is an entirely different way of going, actually, I'm going to allow myself to be operating in a place that can dream about not what can change over there, but what can change into the future. What can I be capable of, and actually bring this like level of envisioning to myself. And ultimately,
and the possibilities. And this podcast wouldn't exist if not
without that.
Yeah. So, well done.
Thank you.
And in the sixth stage of rational intimacy is where we live out that vision. And we live into healthy, intimate relationship itself. In other words, in the sixth stage of rational intimacy, we get to live out the vision rather than endlessly chasing a fantasy.
So it's being present, really.
Oh.
Yeah, very present.
Being present. Yes. So rather than a dysfunctional and perhaps even abusive intimate relationship with self and others, rational intimacy is a personal connection at an appropriate level of interaction that is healthy and consensually and mutually beneficial to the degree that the other person chooses to participate in it. And even when that other person is ourselves, we can still choose, no, going forward. And I'm going to live in a healthy, intimate relationship with me. And I may not even be on board with that, but I can get me on board with that.
Yeah.
And the core strength associated with living in that healthy, intimate relationship is being truly empowered for personal and corporate well-being. You aren't in it alone anymore. There's a caring community to be an increasingly vital part of.
Wow. So good.
Yeah. So then that seventh stage of rational intimacy that naturally arises out of that empowering living out the vision is what I call commendation. And to commend someone is to compliment, to admire, to honor them. And to commend someone is to tell them, well done. And that someone in this case is you, yourself. And you get to have a sense of your own accomplishments and appreciating them from all this personal growth and maturity that's been developing. And you're able to internalize when others express that to you.
Yes.
So when someone pays you a compliment in rational intimacy, you can receive it graciously and agree with the opinion.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just thinking about that because I remember being so uncomfortable years ago. I made a decision, which actually isn't rational intimacy, but I made a decision to whenever someone would pay me a compliment, which would make me feel so uncomfortable, that I would say, "Well, thank you. I agree." Like I thought I'm just going to project this ridiculous positivity about myself. But that wasn't true either, because inside I was like, oh, like I don't really believe what you're saying about me. But what this is believing it.
Yes.
It's not just saying it.
It's, I I think that too.
I think that too.
And I can affirm that. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because of that, the more we can embrace and do embrace naturally and organically that sense of commendation, we are increasingly influential in our own lives and in relationships and in situations. And then that eighth, and I can't say final stage in rational intimacy because there isn't a final stage in rational intimacy. It just naturally propels itself into the next go-round. And that eighth stage in rational intimacy is motivation. And there's a growing commitment to personal growth and maturity, a deepening sense of motivation to become and enhance all that you can be. And the core strength associated with motivation is maturing self-image and an increasingly sober self-esteem.
Yeah. I love that. Well, thank you, Tom, for just giving us that quick overview. And like we'll be going over these again and again, like you said right at the beginning of the episode. You know, to learn these things, it's just to live in that space, to absorb it, and think through how these have actually affected the parts of our lives, really. Yeah.
A year ago, when we first met, you had heard about this through friends and acquaintances, and they were saying, boy, there's this thing. It can be really transforming. And you've experienced that transition from being perpetually in the tsunami to some degree or another.
Yeah.
To being more and more in relational intimacy. As I said, this podcast is a function of that. It's a fruit of that with yourself and others. So perhaps we could have a bit of conversation about the shift that has occurred in your life with being able to activate homeostasis in body, mind, and spirit.
Yeah.
For example, here we are doing this podcast, and that we are actually doing it. And it is having a beneficial effect for our listeners.
Yeah.
They're learning about, or they're relearning and learning more about, because a number of our listeners are people who have done all this. And I've heard from many of them. I just listening to this, it helped me understand more and more the things that you introduced me to.
Well, I remember, I don't know if you remember this, Tom, but I think, because part of this podcast is that, obviously we're having these conversations and I'm editing some of this stuff too. we're not a fancy operation here, guys. This is like grassroots stuff. But I think I've said to you just in the last few weeks that actually just listening to this stuff more and more, it's got, I love the fact that we're growing and we're learning with our listeners. It's impacting me just having these conversations, and I feel like the more and more I listen to some of the things that we're talking about, the more it's impacting me, the more it's becoming more normal in my life. But yes, like a year ago, I came to you, like we mentioned already, but a little bit, but came to you initially for therapy. I think I was feeling, I've been on a healing pursuit for a number of years from, some traumatic stuff and just, things in my life. I know that I felt like emotionally I needed to heal, and then physically I needed to heal. My emotions would interact with my body pretty significantly. So that was the reason I came to you. I was like, okay, I remember someone saying to me, AHA can, talking to me a little bit about this normalization of stress. And I remember thinking, actually, for someone who had no idea about, neurobiology or any of that stuff, funny enough, in my own journey, I remember saying to someone at some point, I actually think something's slightly broken or something's off in my brain because I remember thinking, I wonder, what is the impact of trauma? Like, how does that get resolved? And so when someone told me in their own words what AHA was, which was pretty basic and simple from their version of it, it really actually made sense to me. And I know some people just do it because they just think, I have no idea what what it is, but hey, why
And
why not?
And it helped my friend.
Yeah,
And
but
so I'll have a go at it.
I actually felt like, oh, I kind of get how this could work. So that was the reason why I came to you initially. But I had no idea what this was going to like pull me into, which is like rational intimacy, and how dramatically, you know, not only, thank goodness, it just brought a level of normalization and healing and to some of the ways my body would react to stress and trauma. So I'm so grateful for that. But then there's this whole other world that I had no idea I was going to walk into. And it's, like we said, it's only been a year. I've experienced the healing effects of AHA in my relationships, in the way I relate to myself. And then ultimately out of that space, the way I'm able now to relate to others in a rational and healthy way. And so, yeah.
And that's opened up a vision for you out of that sense of contentment. I can be okay. That doesn't mean everything is all fine and dandy, but I am okay and I have a sense of well-being and I can move forward with my life. And that's allowed you to explore more and more the gifting that you naturally have and being able to have that sense of poise and enter into what could be.
And I think, Tom, that first stage of rational intimacy is actually incredibly important and like almost like the jump. Because
it's the shift.
It is the shift because, like you said, the other ones almost organically, once you got that one in, the other ones organically grow out of it. And the reason I say that is because I think that in the tsunami of stress, I never felt that sense of contentment and well-being.
You couldn't.
I actually felt like if I can just survive, if I can just hang on, that was my level, you know. So this is the jump to being. I'm not just scraping by. I'm actually well, you know. When you can get to that point where that is your foundation, then you start living out, I think, this rational intimacy. But it took AHA actually somatically, cognitively and spiritually for me to make the jump, I think, from, you know, the tsunami of stress, which is, I don't feel well. I feel like, honestly, most days I feel like I'm barely surviving and clinging on, and I'm glad that I'm not completely falling apart, but that was the hope, just to not fall apart, to move from that to a place of actually homeostasis has brought me into mind, body, spirit, has brought me into this place where I'm content, I'm well, and from now on out, let's see how I can grow, you know, and then you can actually think about grace, the gifting, the poise.
Autonomic healing allows us not simply to survive, but to thrive.
And that's what rational intimacy does, is the thriving part.
And it's a totally different paradigm. No longer is it this escalating pattern of flee and fight and flee and fight and avoid and need to feel good and shame and guilt and all the rest of that kind of stuff. It's rational intimacy.
And I think for me, you know, some of the issues I think that came up for me, especially around some of the relational stuff, I think I found it harder to love myself than others, but which, you know, can kind of sound all self-sacrificial, but it's not.
No.
It's actually incredibly unhealthy way to operate, and it taps into all this neediness. So then actually, if you're loving others and not actually loving yourself, when they don't love you back, or seemingly so, then that's the whole kind of the need for affirmation, you know, that there's that massive like tsunami of, or spiral, or whatever we want to call it, of needing affirmation. And when that doesn't come, what do? because you don't love yourself. So you have no foundation to really love well. And so I think for me, one of the things that I've really learned in this paradigm of rational intimacy is to start there, loving, I'm a loving person, and that means I've got to love myself. And actually, you know what? If I have a hard day, or someone doesn't say something in the right way, or I don't know, like, it's so much more easy for me to kind of be balanced in my approach, because actually it doesn't affect the way I love myself.
Yes, because that contentment and feeling secure and capable is coming out of you being loving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is naturally a space you occupy.
Mm-hmm.
That then allows the grace and the gifting and the poise, and you're feeling empowered. And rather than obsessing about, you have a sense of trust, and you can trust Ruth.
Mm-hmm. And I think, again, that sense of obsessing about what is wrong took a lot of my energy. And my experience in rational intimacy is that moving into trusting, those gifts, trusting the space, trusting who I am.
Which has manifested itself in much more realistically dealing with challenges.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Rather than obsessing about.
Yeah. And I think also when you start obsessing, it's like, for me, I would just kind of have a reaction of wanting to kind of just run and bolt. That was like the running away, the not being present, the wanting to not engage, all of that stuff. Whereas when you've got grace, it's like, okay, not everything is
this is
perfect.
A challenge,
but I'm not in that space of mistrusting everything, so I need to leave. Instead, I've got grace to deal with the challenges that are in front of me.
Mm-hmm. And realistically dealing with the challenges with gifting and poise and trust naturally and organically grew into that sense of engagement and connection, and you became influential and got this guy to do a podcast with you.
Hey, hang on a minute. And you got this girl to do a podcast with you.
Well, okay. But there was so much learning involved in that.
Totally.
And you totally invested in that. You went forward with that. You didn't have a lot of garage band audio engineering and all of that.
No, I don't have a degree in that at
all. But you were all about learning that.
Yeah, and I think there is a real difference there when you're, out of the tsunami into rational intimacy, instead of having these like motivation, these drives that aren't healthy, that, and I've been in that space where, I'm a pretty, in the past, I would say of myself that I'm a hard worker. I apply myself, and I am a visionary. I can kind of like, I'll make something happen. But all of that actually subtly can have a really weirdly bad motivation behind it. Whereas when you're in rational intimacy, this open there's more of an open-handedness in, okay, and it comes down to that kind of a bit of that sober self-esteem. But okay, I'm thinking about the possibilities of what could be, which is kind of what we were talking about with this podcast. How can we do this, Tom? How can we get some of this stuff out? And yet there's this, the knowledge of we're just kind of learning. We don't know. Is this going to be perfect? No, that's fine.
It's not about getting it right or doing it well or anything like that. It's about loving and learning, and that engages and connects with people.
Yeah, totally.
Yep, including ourselves, which allows there to be a beneficial influence. That then, for you, was able to grow into, and did grow into, and has continued to grow into a sense of devotion. And that healthy self-image and sober self-esteem and your commitment to well-being, your own and other people's. And yes, people can do things that harm themselves and others. But you get to facilitate change that sets people free.
Yeah. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the envisioning, which for you has been all about being loving and feeling secure and capable enough to be loving and risk loving.
Yeah.
Whether that's returned or not returned, whether it's supported or not supported. And the envisioning of what would be a loving thing. How can that spread?
Yeah. And I think you're right in terms of the security. I think, out of, being so insecure, it's very difficult to be envisioning, and the risk of loving well. And like you say, and I think this comes right back to the loving yourself, because the risk of loving when you don't love yourself is, for me, is very, very scary.
Oh, it's totally threatening.
It's like, how can I even exist if that happens? It would crush me,
Yes.
Whereas knowing the foundation of knowing that you can love yourself, and out of that, even then, you can love freely, even if it's not returned, because then that will not crush you.
Yes. Which, wait for it, of course, allows you to more and more experience rational intimacy, where you feel increasingly empowered because you can trust.
Yeah.
And you can extend that sense of confidence. And that may or may not be reciprocated. Not a deal breaker.
And then when you're in that space, you're empowered. And I think this is really interesting for me, because when I just look like in that reflection of, life after a year of doing this, I think so much of my hopes and my anticipation was on other people empowering me. And what I've shifted into, and again, it's not out of a false overblown confidence or anything, but what I've shifted into is that I can empower me. I'm empowered. So it's a really different, and then I'm not putting that heavy burden on other people to do that. And so that's actually been a huge shift in my life, and for others, to be free in that space of because I trust, because I'm now in this space of rational intimacy, I'm empowered, and I don't have to wait around for anyone else to tell me that or give me that. People do empower each other, but it starts with that feeling of I'm empowered. Yeah.
Which then allows you to learn more and more. And the more and more you have learned about things, the more influential you've been. And the more you can internalize and simply affirm when you are commended. When people say, well done, that was great, thank you so much.
And now I say, you're welcome. And I believe it, and that's okay. And that's not that I'm able to accept who I am in that space and enjoy some of those achievements.
Yeah, which has been highly motivating. And it's been wonderful to watch that happen. And your continued personal growth and maturity and commitment to that, able to reconcile yourself with situations and relationships and all sorts of things that can be rough, can be tough, can be difficult. But okay.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I can be reconciled to that. Rather than finding fault with yourself or others or situations, it's like, okay, what's the solution here? How can this move forward?
And it opens up a really great world to live in. Like you said, it's not devoid of hardships or challenges.
No.
But to know that you are secure and capable, you're empowered, you have influence, and you have a healthy self-image and this sober self-esteem is just such great footing. To have in life. Yeah,
the tsunami of stress, in that we become a caricature of ourselves. Certain features or aspects of our identity, of our lives, of our persona are over accentuated and we become a caricature. But with rational intimacy, that is who we really are. That is us. And we get to live that. And it's a wonderful place to be. And it all begins with homeostasis and being able to restore well-being, normal, optimum functioning in body, mind, and spirit. Yeah. You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.